Hello, welcome to Legal Lines. I'm Locke Meredith. Today we're going to have Judge Mike McDonald. He is a judge on the 19th Judicial District Court. Judge McDonald is pretty much next in line to move to the First Circuit Court of Appeals, so we'll talk about his role as a judge on the 19th and what he anticipates doing on the First Circuit Court of Appeal. Please join us. Welcome to Legal Lines. I'm Locke Meredith. Today we're very fortunate to have with us Judge Mike McDonald with the 19th Judicial District Court. Judge McDonald has been on the bench there for 15 and a half years, the longest sitting judge. So we're going to talk to Judge McDonald today. Thank you very much for being here, Judge.
Thank you for having me.
Tell us a little bit about yourself, a little personal history.
Well, I was born in Baton Rouge. I graduated from Baton Rouge High School. Went to LSU, graduated undergraduate school there in 1964. 1968. And then served for 3.5 years in the United States Navy.
What did you do for those?
I was an intelligence officer, which some people say is a contradiction in terms. But I served on an aircraft carrier. I would brief pilots when they flew their missions and debrief them when they came back.
Interesting.
And then went to LSU Law School upon my release from active duty. I stayed in the reserves for 27 years and finally retired, or they kicked me out in 1997. And when I finished law school, I went to work at the district attorney's office. I worked for O.C. Brown for about 5 years.
What did you do there?
I was a prosecutor initially in misdemeanor cases, and then I was the head of the drug and narcotics section. We didn't have a drug court back then, so I handled all the drug prosecutions in 6 different sections of court.
Wow.
And
a lot of work.
Well, a lot of coordination. You'd have to inquire about what the docket looked like, so you could explain to the judge, I can't be 2 places at one time, so I may be a little late getting here, but I will be here on motions and things. And then we had a kind of a sliding schedule on when the trials were, so I didn't have trials at one place at one time.
So what did you do after that?
And then I went into private practice with a small law firm, D'Amico, Curate, and Danf.
What kind of practice?
Just a general practice.
So did everything?
Did some probably mostly plaintiff personal injury type work, some family work, and some criminal defense work. And with Sam D'Amico, Louis Curate, and Jack Danf, who were just fine lawyers and really good people. Sam D'Amico is probably one of the preeminent lawyers in this town. I think he's been practicing over 60 years, and still goes to work every day. And he's just a prince of a person and was a wonderful mentor. It's unfortunate that young lawyers can't have somebody like that to work for, because if they did, I think that the legal profession would be a lot better. You
don't really know how to be a lawyer, right, when you get out of law school?
No, you don't. And the Harvey Posners, the Sam D'Amicos, the Louis Curates,
a lot of veterans, huh?
Just all those guys. A lot of them are dead now, but really did a good job of training people on how to practice law and how to be a good lawyer.
So how long were you in the private practice?
5 years.
What did you do after that?
I was elected judge in 1986.
And you've been there since?
Yep.
Let's talk about that. Did you start off in the criminal section?
I did.
That's kind of the way that you guys have worked it out,
right.
Isn't it?
And we divided ourselves by agreement into civil and criminal, and so generally the newer judges end up presiding over criminal dockets, and the more senior judges preside over civil dockets.
Now, why is that?
I'm not real sure, but that's the way it was when I got there, and that's the way it's been ever since.
Now, how long were you on the criminal bench?
6 years, and I've been on the civil for about 9. Criminal is a little, maybe not, doesn't quite have the broad spectrum that civil does. In civil you deal with probably mostly automobile wrecks, but medical malpractice cases, disputes between landowners over where the property line might be, or somebody's dumping something in their property that they shouldn't. We deal with legal malpractice cases, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And just any type of dispute that people might get into.
Also some pretty boring stuff like tax lawsuits and such.
Sometimes. And you end up with some cases where people have paid some fairly substantial amounts of money, particularly businesses, to the state under protest, and they come to us. Appeals from the tax commission and things like that come to us. Any suits against state agencies come to us because we're the site of where state government is located.
Now, in your tenure there, as I appreciate it, we've got a lot of new subcategories of courts in the context of juvenile court and city court jurisdictions. Right. Amounts have increased. Tell me about that, because I imagine the cases that you've handled in the past maybe are not as many because of the context, or in the context of these new courts. Is that right or wrong?
Well, we thought that might be the case, but I'm not sure it is. And that was one of the things that was discussed when they were increasing the jurisdictional limits in city court.
When we say jurisdictional
limits means the amount of the claim. If your claim is worth more than $20,000, you can't go to city court. In Baton Rouge, we have several different courts that they don't have in other places. In Baton Rouge, or in East Baton Rouge Parish, we have 3 city courts. We have the Baker City Court, the Zachary City Court, and then we've also got the Baton Rouge City Court that has, 5 judges over there. And if your cause of action, if whatever it is that
you're fighting over,
right, if you got in an automobile wreck and it happened inside the city limits of Baton Rouge, or if you had a contract dispute and the contract was signed and perfected inside the city limits of Baton Rouge, if your cause of action arose inside the city limits of Baton Rouge, then you can bring your case to city court.
Now, you could still go to the district court
where you still go to, that's correct.
But you have now the choice of either going to city court or now, why would you choose, why would a person decide to go to city court instead of district court?
Well, first, like I said, first of all, if your dispute is worth more than $20,000, you can't go to city court. If it's worth less than that, and it was in the city, and of course, like I said, if it was outside the city limits, you don't have the option of going to city court. But if you meet both those criteria, then you, as a general rule, and I really haven't checked over there recently, but you used to be able to get to court quicker in city court than you could in district court, because of the fact that they don't deal with as many cases, and the cases aren't generally, and I don't mean to say that they don't handle important cases, but the case they probably would not handle medical malpractice cases, cases and suits that would last maybe 2 or 3 weeks at a time to try. So you can probably get a quicker court date over there and get to court quicker than you could with us. And they also have a small claims court over there, so you can represent yourself. The rules are somewhat different. They don't make a record of the case. But
and evidence isn't as tight, is it?
That's correct.
The rules. I mean,
you can get into court fairly quickly. You generally represent yourself, and whatever the outcome is, you're stuck with, because there's really no appeal from there.
And I think that's a great system, because that enables folks access to the judicial system at minimal cost, and they don't have to pay the lawyers and all the costs associated with the lawsuit.
Right. Now, in other parishes, like East Feliciana Parish, East and West Feliciana, the Ascension parishes across the river, they have the judges over there, the district court judges, handle everything.
Meaning small claims?
No, well, meaning they handle family court, divorces, those kinds of things. But in Baton Rouge, we've got a family court, we've got a juvenile court, and then we've got our civil court.
All right, Judge, let's continue this topic when we come back. We'll be right back. Thank you. Welcome back to Legal Lines. I'm Locke Meredith, and have today with me Judge Mike McDonald. He's a judge on the 19th Judicial District Court. Judge, we were talking about the city court and the small claims court that we have available here in Baton Rouge, and then the district court. And of course, we have the appellate court system.
Right.
And then we have the Louisiana Supreme Court system.
Right.
And then on top of all that, we have the federal system in some certain situations, which basically have the same 3 levels: trial court, appellate court, and then the United States Supreme Court.
That's correct.
That's a lot of courts that we have available to us. Let's talk about the whole big overview here, the legislature and how it interacts with the judiciary, and then the executive branch, and how all 3 of those branches of government work together, and the true political essence of all of this.
Well, they're all separate, of course, and aren't supposed to have any influence over each other, and I'd like to think that at least on the judiciary that they don't.
Let's define these things, because not everybody remembers.
Okay, well, the executive branch is, of course, the governor.
On a smaller scale, it'd be the mayor.
The mayor. People like the Division of Administration. because that's the people making the executive branch run on the day-to-day basis. The legislative branch, of course, is the state legislature, comprised of the Louisiana Senate and the Louisiana House of Representatives.
And then on the local level, we'd have here the East
City
Baton Rouge
Council.
Parish.
City Council, and then in Baker and Zachary, you've got their councils, and each of them have a mayor. And then you've got all the various boards and things that operate under the executive branch. And then you've also got some things that operate under the legislative branch, I guess, and the state legislature. The one that's gotten the most notoriety here recently is the legislative auditor.
He's getting around, isn't he?
He keeps popping up periodically, and
then, of course, the third branch is the judiciary.
And the third branch is the judiciary, and of course we rely on the other branches to fund us, because we're not self-funding. They have to provide for the means of paying for the judges and the judges' staff. We have probably 120 or so people that work for us up at the courthouse.
So the way the system, as I recall social studies, was the executive, generally legislature will pass the laws, the executive is supposed to implement them and participates in the execution or creation of the laws, and then the judiciary, you guys, the judges, interpret them.
That's correct.
And then we've got the police force out there that basically makes sure that it goes down the way it's supposed to go down.
Well, and they enforce the law, and that's, I suppose, the police department is really, I don't know if you plug them into one of those pigeonholes, but they're probably with the executive branch out there implementing the law and,
right.
and making sure that the law works. And then we're the ones that try to look at it and say, okay, what is this supposed to mean? If there's some confusion, or if there's some confusion with two laws, and try to make sense out of it and say, well, what do we think that the legislature meant here?
So how does this practically and politically work? You guys are interpreting the laws that the legislature sends down to you along with the executive branch, and yet they fund y'all.
Right.
So you need them, and they kind of need you to make sure you're interpreting the laws they want you to, the way they want.
And sometimes they decide that we don't interpret the law like they wanted to, which means they probably didn't write the law as well as they could have. And they will then come back, and sometimes they do a job of passing a law that says we are overruling some case.
I mean, they'll expressly say that.
Oh yeah, they'll say that in the statute, and which is probably not good drafting. But there's no question about what they're trying to do in that regard, because they feel like the court has overstepped its bounds in expanding some piece of legislation or some law somewhere that they didn't intend for it to go.
Which ultimately, the legislative branch is supposed to be representative of the people, and so if they're the elected officials and they want a law to say this, and you folks are interpreting it a way they didn't anticipate, then they've got to fix it.
That's right.
They're doing their job.
And I would suggest the court is too.
Exactly, because you guys are elected.
And the other situation is that the legislature is more responsive to the public. The court is supposed to be responsive to the law and the Constitution, which is the ultimate law. And so the legislature, you will see sometimes reacting to public opinion and reacting to what they believe to be some need, and sometimes that's motivated by an actual need, sometimes it's motivated by politics.
Now, bottom line is, the way this is set up is the judiciary is supposed to be equal with the executive, and the executive with the legislature, and so it's not unusual that there would be a differing of opinions.
And an interesting aspect of that is one reason I tell people that judicial elections are very important is because it takes a majority of the legislature to enact a law. I forget how many they have up there, but a majority of the senators have to vote for it, a majority of the House has to vote for it. It takes one judge to declare a law unconstitutional.
So if we have, let's say, 100 representatives, it's going to take 51 to pass the law.
Right, and if I decide it's unconstitutional, it is. Now, the Court of Appeal may decide that I was wrong, in which case 3 or 5 judges will look at it and decide that I was right or wrong. And then it goes to the Louisiana Supreme Court, where you have 7 judges. And if 4 of them say I was right, it's unconstitutional. The legislature gets to try to do it all over again.
So a whole lot fewer folks deciding the ultimate outcome.
That's correct.
What do you think the communication is between those two branches, the judiciary and the legislative? Do they get you guys up there to talk to them about laws they're considering?
Not usually. Probably not as much as they ought to. But they have good staff up there that generally do a pretty good job of helping to draft legislation and deconflicting parts of legislation. You've got the Louisiana Law Institute, which is a very good body made up of jurists and lawyers and people from around the state, and the legislature will designate certain problems or whatever and assign the Law Institute the task of drafting legislation or revising portions of legislation that already exists, like our civil code. Maybe a whole section of the civil code will need to be reworked, and the Law Institute is generally the arm that's tasked to do that.
Now, do they communicate with the judiciary folks?
No. And I say they don't, they haven't communicated with me. But there's no reason they couldn't. But the problem is that I don't want to get involved in a situation where I'm telling somebody how to draft legislation if, in fact, that legislation may come to me. I was asked one time, I was the duty judge for the rehabilitation and of insurance companies. I was an insurance duty judge and was asked some things about what I would recommend to the liquidator, and I said, I don't do that.
Not your job.
Right, because I would then have to review his work.
And that's all in the concept of separate branches and the checks and balances of all of this.
That's right.
And the check they have on the judiciary is the purse strings, and it's not supposed to use it, but maybe do a little bit, and also coming and overruling decisions made. Okay, Judge, we're going to move to that on the next part of the show. Thank you for being with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Legal Lines. I'm Locke Meredith and have here today Judge Mike McDonald. Judge, we were talking about the legislative branch and the judicial branch. Legislature and judiciary, you guys are elected, right?
Correct.
What do you think of that as compared to maybe having the governor, the mayor, or the council appoint judges?
In many jurisdictions, they do have what they call a merit selection process. And
when you say jurisdiction, you're talking about other states?
Other states. And I guess it works well for them. Although I did speak to a judge one time at a conference from another state, and he said, if you don't have merit selection, don't go to it.
Meaning what?
Well, he didn't elaborate, but I guess the problem is that any system will have some good aspects and some bad aspects.
Is it polluted by politics?
I think it could be. The bottom line question you have to ask yourself is, do you trust the person who's making the final judgment and making the appointment? And the process, as I understand it, and as it's been proposed in the past and would probably be proposed in the future, is there would be some type of a blue ribbon committee of 20 people, let's say, from representing various groups in your community, labor, business, minorities, different other groups, whatever various segments are in your community, and they would meet and receive the applications, maybe conduct interviews, and then they would make a list of maybe 10 people, and they would submit those 10 people, or maybe they would submit 3 names to the governor or whoever it might be, and then the governor would choose one of those people. And that's where the politics would come in.
Right.
Because then you'd see a lot of behind-the-scenes backdoor politicking, I'm certain, with the governor to appoint a certain person. However, if you had politics out of it to that point, and I don't know that you would or you wouldn't, I'm really not that familiar with how some of those systems have worked, then at least maybe the 3 people would not be that political, or the names would not be that political.
Now, our federal judiciary, the judges on the federal bench, they're appointed, aren't they, by the president?
They are.
The president picks a nominee, and then the Congress has to decide whether they like them. And there's a lot of politics in that, isn't there?
My understanding, there's a whole lot of politics. And I could sit here and we could go through the history of some of the federal judges and what their claim to fame was, and most of it had nothing to do with what type of lawyer they were.
Doesn't mean they were bad judges, but that wasn't the criteria.
Some of them have been excellent judges. Some of them have been wonderful judges. But the point is not what type of judge you are once you get there. The point is what type of process you went through in order to select the person.
Now, the federal judges are appointed for life.
That's correct.
You guys have to run how often?
Every 6 years.
So you're accountable to the people you serve.
That's correct. Sometimes there's not as much interest in a judicial election for whatever reason, and we don't have very large turnout at some of the elections.
What's the average turnout?
Well, it depends. If it's a special election, meaning that there's a vacancy that occurred in an off year, you might get 20%. I remember a race some years ago, and there were several other things going on in the primary, but they were all resolved. And in the runoff election, the number of votes that the two candidates got added together was less than either one of them got in the primary.
Jeez, man.
Individually. So
not many people deciding the fate.
But even so, 20% of the voters is probably maybe a better decision maker than 20 people.
It's a whole lot more people than 20 blue ribbon folks.
The other problem, though, is that campaigns are getting expensive. It's not unusual to spend over $100,000 on trying to get a judge elected. Let me say this, that I don't believe that, and I certainly don't know any judges that make decisions based on who contributed to the campaigns. Many times it's lawyers like yourself, and that's a problem.
Could be.
I just don't like the fact that these campaigns are funded on the backs of lawyers.
Kind of gives the appearance of impropriety.
Well, and you get 3 or 4 judges or people running for judge, and you get lawyers just constantly having to contribute to judicial campaigns.
How do we fix that?
And I don't know necessarily how to fix that, because things cost. The cost of doing business has gone up. If you're going to get on television, that's expensive. Newspaper ads are expensive.
Of course, interesting thing too is lawyers are the ones that deal with the judges on a regular basis. The folks who are voting in the general populace, they really probably don't deal with the system that much.
No, but a lot of times they get involved and make contributions. I said one time first time I ran, and I haven't been opposed since then, is that I'd rather have 10 people give me $25 than one person give me $250, because that's 10 people that feel like they've bought into me, and that $25 probably meant more to them than the $250 did.
Well, maybe one of the ways to solve the problem is limit the amount of the contribution that an individual can make.
Possibly. One thing that's been proposed, it would limit some of these kind of things, because in the Supreme Court race we just had last year, one of the candidates spent over $1 million and did not get elected. And
so money doesn't necessarily guarantee you win, does it?
And the person who did get elected, it was a special election. He comes up for re-election at the end of this fall, and there's been some rumor that his opponent from last time may run against him this time.
Really?
That happened. There's a fellow sitting on the Supreme Court right now that unseated someone after a year. So and those are expensive propositions. Perhaps a compromise that's been discussed would be to elect judges at the trial level, where I sit. The city court judges, family court, juvenile court, and then appoint judges to the appellate court and the Supreme Court. And arguably, the pool of candidates would come from judges who had already been elected. But that wouldn't necessarily be a criteria. So the panel could recommend somebody who wasn't a judge. But then again, I don't know if that's a workable compromise, but I've heard that suggested. And that at least gives the people the chance to elect and select the judges as they enter
Now, you're getting ready to run for the appellate court, right?
That's correct.
Now, you
October 5th.
should be unopposed, right?
Well,
Who
knows?
You certainly deserve to be unopposed.
Well,
You've been there the longest than any other judge coming to the city.
I don't know that
right?
anybody deserves to be unopposed, particularly if they're running for a different seat. I would suggest that if I've been doing a good job, and I guess people thought I have been because I've come up for re-election twice and have been unopposed both times. I think if a judge is doing a good job and comes up for re-election, that I think there's something to say that they shouldn't be opposed. But when you move into another seat and you're trying to take another seat, then anybody else has as much right to run for it as I do.
Sure.
I mean, I hope I won't have any opposition. That'd certainly be my preference. I feel like that if you're going to sit on the Court of Appeal, that the best judges on the Court of Appeal are judges who have been trial judges.
And you've been one for 15 and a half years.
That's right.
Thank you so much. I'm told we got to wrap it up. Thank you for being on the show. I look forward to having you, and happy Easter.
Thank you. You too.
Thank you for joining us on the Legal Lines. We'll see you soon.